What if the story you learned about the Great Pyramid is not the beginning, but the faint afterglow of something far older? Something that left its fingerprints on the limestone long before the first Egyptian dynasty ever carved a hieroglyph. Imagine if the monument we call Khufu's pyramid is not the achievement of a rising civilization, but the last surviving heartbeat of a forgotten one, an inheritance misunderstood, repurposed, and finally claimed by those who came much later. For centuries, we've been told a simple tale, that a newly unified kingdom rallied its people, shaped millions of stone blocks with copper tools, and raised a flawless geometric titan in just a few decades. But what if that certainty dissolves under closer light? What if erosion patterns, astronomical alignments, and silent architectural choices whisper a timeline that stretches far beyond the old kingdom, back to an age erased not by conquerors, but by catastrophe? There are stones on the plateau that seem to carry the scars of rain that should never have fallen in the desert. There are measurements so precise they feel more like inherited knowledge than first attempts. And there are questions, uncomfortable ones, that mainstream history has quietly stepped around. If the pyramid is older than Egypt, then we are not just wrong about a dynasty. We are wrong about the entire story of civilization itself. And that possibility changes everything. Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. For most people, the Great Pyramid exists as a symbol of Egypt. Golden sands, the silhouette of a ruler's tomb against the horizon, a testament to a civilization rising out of the Nile Valley with ambition and religious conviction. But that image is like a postcard version of history, a clean and simplified snapshot hiding all the untidy shadows beneath it. When you step closer, closer than textbooks, closer than tour guides, you begin to realize that this monument refuses to fit neatly inside the time period it has been assigned. It resists the old kingdom like a key that turns but never locks. Something about its age, its engineering choices, its impossible precision feels out of place, like discovering modern circuitry inside a medieval cathedral. And the deeper you go, the more those mismatches multiply. The entire plateau radiates a sense of strangeness once the crowds thin out and the desert wind becomes the only voice. Guides will tell you to look at the pyramid's height, its mass, its perfect geometry. But they rarely mention the irregularities that should not exist if the structure truly dates to around 2500 BCE. They do not linger on the limestone blocks at the base that show signs of intense weathering. Weathering consistent not with a dry desert, but with many centuries of heavy rain. Egyptologists will nod politely, explain it away, gesture towards the Sahara's shifting climate thousands of years earlier. Yet even those explanations fail to grasp the scale of the erosion or the timing of when such rains last touched this land. Because here is the uncomfortable truth. The kind of water damage carved into the Sphinx enclosure and parts of the plateau predates the Old Kingdom by thousands of years. It speaks of storms, humidity, and long-term precipitation that simply didn't exist in Khufu's era. And if the geology is correct, even partially, it means the foundation stones of the plateau, including those belonging to the earliest layers of the Great Pyramid, may have been exposed long before dynastic Egypt began chiseling its history into stone. It means something monumental stood here already, waiting for the Egyptians to inherit it. When you look closely at the base course stones of the Great Pyramid, you notice they are not arranged like typical Old Kingdom masonry. They are colossal, far larger and heavier than the stones placed above them. Some weighed dozens of tons, shaped with a precision that later builders seemed unwilling or unable to replicate. Egyptians absolutely were master builders, but their architectural evolution follows a clear path. Their structures gradually improve in craftsmanship over centuries. Yet here, on the plateau, we see the opposite. The earliest layers appear more advanced, more carefully fitted, while the upper layers reflect the more familiar Egyptian approach: smaller blocks, faster work, easier logistics. It's as if someone started this project with techniques the Egyptians never fully mastered, then the Egyptians continued it using their own methods. And that raises the question no one dares frame plainly. Did Khufu build the Great Pyramid, or did he only inherit, modify, or complete something already ancient in his time? Walk around the base at dawn, when the desert air is sharp and the sun cuts sideways across the stones, and you can feel the tension between these two building styles. The lower blocks are weathered but breathtakingly exact, interlocked with angles so subtle you can barely slide a knife blade between them. Above them, the layers begin to shift toward standard Old Kingdom masonry, still impressive, but fundamentally different in its ambition. It's like witnessing a relay race frozen in stone, one civilization beginning something extraordinary, another picking it up without truly understanding its original purpose. There are clues hidden in geometry as well. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with astonishing precision, far more accurate than anything we can attribute to copper tools, stretched cords, and the rudimentary surveying equipment of its alleged era. The error is less than 1/15th of a degree, a feat modern engineers praise with genuine astonishment. Every edge, every angle, every alignment suggests knowledge of the Earth that seems to exceed what was known in the 3rd millennium BCE. The curvature of the Earth is subtly accounted for. The ratio of base to height mirrors mathematical constants that supposedly weren't recognized for thousands of years. These are details that shouldn't appear in a first attempt at pyramid building, yet here they are, fully formed in the earliest and most perfect pyramid ever constructed. It is as though the builders were not experimenting toward perfection. They were replicating something they already understood deeply. But if that is true, where did this knowledge come from? How does a society leap from simple mastabas and modest stepped pyramids to the most mathematically precise stone monument on Earth, only to never surpass that achievement again? Night falls on the plateau with a kind of ancient sorrow. The air cools, the noise fades, and the pyramids loom like silhouettes from a dream. In that silence, you start to realize the weight of what has been overlooked. The Egyptians left a plentiful record of their achievements. These were a people who documented everything from royal lineages to harvest yields. They recorded battles, love stories, religious rituals, funerary practices, myths, trade routes, tax inventories. Yet in all that information, in all their inscriptions and carvings, there is no detailed record of the planning, designing, or construction of the Great Pyramid. For a project that would have consumed decades, altered the economy, redirected labor, and reshaped the entire nation. The silence is deafening. Egyptologists chalk it up to lost documentation. But such a monumental silence feels less like an absence and more like an omission. The Egyptians claimed ownership of many structures on the plateau because it was what powerful dynasties did. They asserted, inscribed, and adopted. They added their own constructions nearby, carved their symbols onto older monuments, restored and appropriated sites that predated them. They were inheritors of a landscape already shaped by something older. And nowhere does this become more apparent than inside the Great Pyramid itself. Inside, the architecture shifts from the practical to the otherworldly. The ascending passage, narrow and steep, feels like a channel carved with deliberate intent, its angles aligning with specific stars at specific times. The Grand Gallery opens above you like the interior of an ancient engine, its corbelled walls rising with impossible symmetry, its acoustics so perfectly tuned that even a soft breath seems amplified into something sacred. Egyptologists claim these are mere architectural necessities, but everything inside suggests purpose beyond mere burial. The grooves, the niches, the resonant chambers, they feel engineered, not ceremonial. No mummy was ever found within, no sarcophagus lid, no funerary inscriptions. It stands as a tomb with no evidence of a body, no clear religious context, no narrative, no decoration whatsoever. It is a machine made of stone, silent and impenetrable, as if the Egyptians encountered it and decided it must be a tomb simply because they had no better explanation. Imagine a young Khufu walking through that immense empty structure, the torchlight flickering across walls that predated his kingship by millennia. Perhaps even then it was already ancient, older than the stories told by priests, older than the oldest myths. Perhaps Khufu recognized the power of adopting such a place, attaching his reign to a structure the people believed was touched by the gods. With a few inscriptions and adjustments, it could be transformed from a relic of a forgotten age into a symbol of his own divine right to rule. In this view, the pyramid becomes not his creation, but his inheritance. There is another clue, one harder to ignore yet often dismissed: the sheer technological challenge of cutting, transporting, and placing the blocks used in the earliest courses. The Egyptians were skilled, but their tools were copper, their methods labor-intensive. Granite blocks weighing up to 70 tons were quarried miles away, somehow lifted, balanced, and fitted with tolerances so fine they rival modern engineering. To assume this was done through brute force alone is to underestimate both the logistics and the precision involved. Ancient cultures around the world often inherited megalithic sites they could not replicate. In Peru, the Inca built on top of older foundations they could not have crafted. In Lebanon, Roman temples rest on stones far larger than anything the Romans themselves ever cut. The pattern repeats. Civilizations arrive, discover ancient foundations, and build upon them. Egypt may have been no different. Then there is the astronomical alignment. The descending passage of the Great Pyramid aimed toward the star Thuban around 3000 BCE, often cited as proof of its construction date. But astronomical alignments can be updated. What if the original alignment was toward a different star at a different epoch, one that aligns with a far earlier date? Some researchers propose star maps that point toward 10,500 BCE, a time of dramatic climate upheaval, the end of the Younger Dryas, the retreat of massive ice sheets. If the earliest phases of the pyramid date to such an era, then history as we know it fractures into something entirely different. A civilization capable of such knowledge, such engineering, and such vision must have existed before the great flood myths found across cultures, before the Sahara dried into desert, before memory compressed into legend. It would mean the Egyptians were not the beginning of civilization in this region, but the inheritors of its remnants. They found the plateau shaped by hands no one remembered, and they adapted it for their own dynasties. The causeway leading toward the Pyramid of Khafra tells a similar story. It is lined with blocks so enormous they defy explanation. These are not standard Egyptian construction choices. They resemble the megalithic foundations found at Baalbek, at Sacsayhuaman, at Göbekli Tepe, sites that whisper of a lost architectural lineage. When cultures share a building style across continents and eras without direct contact, something older may be the thread connecting them. And then there is the bedrock. Under the Great Pyramid, the original builders cut into the plateau with astonishing accuracy, creating a perfectly leveled foundation on uneven terrain. This required knowledge of the land, tools capable of shaping hard limestone with speed and precision, and an understanding of structural stability far ahead of its time. The Egyptians did level foundations elsewhere, but never on this scale with such meticulous perfection. All these clues, geological, architectural, astronomical, point in one direction: an origin story far older than the Old Kingdom. Something catastrophic reset the world long before Egypt rose. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis speaks of global firestorms, meltwater pulses, the flooding of coastlines, and the collapse of early cultures. If an advanced society existed before these cataclysms, their monuments would stand as the last survivors of an age wiped clean. And where would such survivors most likely be found? On the highest stable ground, far from river deltas, on bedrock tough enough to endure the apocalypse. The Giza Plateau fits that description perfectly. Imagine a world at the edge of destruction, a culture fighting to preserve what it could before chaos swallowed everything. Perhaps they built monuments designed to outlast fire, flood, and time itself, a message in stone for whoever came after. Perhaps the Great Pyramid was not a tomb at all, but a repository, a beacon, a stabilizer, or something whose purpose is no longer understood because the world it was made for no longer exists. When the storms passed and the Nile Valley slowly became habitable again, nomadic tribes settled, forming the roots of early Egyptian society. Over millennia, they grew into kingdoms, dynasties, and empires, unaware that the greatest monument in their land was not theirs. If this is true, then the pyramid stands not just as a wonder, but as a survivor of a forgotten age, an age whose memory lingers only in myths of Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods walked the earth and civilization was gifted to humanity. Scholars usually dismiss these stories as metaphor, but what if they are echoing a real cultural memory of a lost people? Myths often preserve truth in distorted form, like reflections on water. And perhaps what the Egyptians called gods were simply the remnants of that earlier civilization, seen through the eyes of a society emerging from darkness. To stand beside the Great Pyramid with this possibility in mind is to feel the ground tilt beneath your certainty. Suddenly the monument feels older, heavier, more haunted. Every stone becomes a question, every angle becomes a clue, and the silence inside becomes deafening, not the silence of an empty tomb, but the silence of a message whose language we no longer understand. If the Great Pyramid predates Egypt, then the timeline of humanity becomes a puzzle with missing pieces. Civilization, as we know it, becomes a chapter in a much longer story. And the question that has lingered unasked for centuries begins to take shape. What kind of world existed before ours, and why did it disappear so completely? We continue, knowing that the next layers will not bring comfort, but deeper shadows. Shadows that stretch across continents and epochs, pulling us toward a forgotten dawn. There is a moment when standing on the Giza plateau at twilight, when the wind shifts and the world feels suddenly older than your imagination can hold. The light dims just enough for the edges of the Great Pyramid to blur, yet not enough for the form to truly disappear. In that half-light, the monument stops looking like something built by human hands and instead resembles a natural part of the earth, an ancient mountain of intention carved long before recorded memory. It is in this fleeting hour, when the desert exhales and the sky cools to a quiet indigo, that the possibility of an older origin becomes more than a theory. It becomes a presence. The plateau itself is unlike any other place in Egypt. The bedrock rises high above the Nile floodplain, a massive limestone shelf shaped by tectonic forces over millions of years. The ancient builders, or inheritors, chose this ground with uncanny precision. It was elevated, stable, resilient against erosion, and immune to seasonal floods. But what is more curious is that the orientation of the entire plateau's structures suggests a master plan that long predates any individual pharaoh. The alignment of the three major pyramids with the cardinal directions and with celestial markers has long been acknowledged, but the exactness, the holistic geometry, and the spatial relationships between the monuments hint at something even more deliberate. They suggest knowledge of Earth's axial tilt, precession, and star positions across epochs. And whoever designed the original blueprint must have understood that the sky itself changes over time, something not fully mapped by modern astronomy until recent centuries. If the Great Pyramid is older than the civilization that claimed it, then it means the plateau was once the center of a culture whose scientific reach extended far beyond what we attribute to ancient humanity. Yet the traces of this culture do not appear as cities, pottery shards, or inscriptions. They appear in stone, massive, immovable, geometrically perfect blocks whose precision acts as the only surviving record of a forgotten mind. This is where the story deepens. The erosion patterns that mark the Sphinx enclosure and parts of the Giza bedrock do not just suggest an older age, they suggest a different climate entirely. Thousands of years before the Sahara became a desert, this region was a lush grassland with periodic monsoon rains and flowing rivers. Geological analysis of the Sphinx's body reveals deep vertical fissures, channels carved by rainfall, not by sand. And the extent of this erosion indicates exposure to centuries of moisture, something impossible during Khufu's reign. If the Sphinx predates the desert, then the foundations of the Great Pyramid, carved from the same bedrock layer, likely do as well. But while the Sphinx offers weathering clues, the Great Pyramid offers mathematical ones. The slope angle of its sides encodes the ratio of p. Its height and base circumference embody relationships linked to Earth's radius and circumference. The placement of its chambers and passages seems to reflect harmonic proportions, resonance frequencies, and even internal temperature stability. These are not mystical interpretations. They are measurable facts. The question is not whether such relationships exist, but how a culture with simple tools and limited mathematical notation achieved them with such elegance and consistency. Egyptologists often insist these proportions are coincidences, but coincidences that appear repeatedly in the earliest, most perfect pyramid, and never again in later ones, begin to stretch beyond probability. If they were accidental, why did later builders not replicate them? Why did the descendants of Khufu construct pyramids of visibly declining quality with poorer alignment, less precision, and far cruder geometry? Why did the so-called pinnacle of Old Kingdom engineering occur so abruptly, so early, and never again reach the same heights? It is as if the knowledge behind the Great Pyramid was inherited rather than developed. Something older taught the template, and the Egyptians built upon what they found, but without fully understanding the original purpose or principles. Deep within the Great Pyramid, where the torchlight reveals walls untouched for millennia, the silence is overwhelming. The air feels ancient, as though each breath is borrowed from a time before human memory. The core blocks here are arranged with such precision that modern builders struggle to explain how the joints remain hairline thin, with no mortar, at angles impossible to achieve without advanced measuring tools. The internal chambers are aligned not for symbolic ritual, but with a level of structural logic and distribution of weight that suggests mathematical modeling long before the concept existed. The so-called King's Chamber is built from massive granite slabs quarried more than 500 miles away, transported across desert and river with no clear method, and placed atop one another in a stacking system that distributes weight across 5 relieving chambers. But even these chambers reveal something strange. The granite beams show tooling marks inconsistent with copper chisels. They suggest cutting methods of greater force and accuracy, methods that hint at technologies lost or forgotten. If the Egyptians were imitating or modifying a structure that already stood when they arrived at the plateau, then the original builders must have possessed tools, techniques, or knowledge that did not survive the cataclysms of the ancient world. Such cataclysms appear in myths across cultures: floods, fires from the sky, sudden freezes, rising seas. After the Younger Dryas period, many regions experienced rapid desertification, the collapse of megafauna, and the disappearance of early human settlements. It is not impossible that an advanced society once existed and was destroyed, leaving only stone as its testament. Archaeologists dismiss this idea because there are no pottery fragments, no bones, no inscriptions linked to such a civilization. But stone structures alone can survive 12,000 years. Organic remains cannot. And if this older culture was minimalist in its lifestyle or used biodegradable materials for everyday life, it would leave little trace. A catastrophic event, comet fragments, massive floods, global fires, could erase an entire world of human achievement, leaving behind only the heaviest monuments. Consider Göbekli Tepe, discovered in Turkey. A massive megalithic site with intricate carvings, predating agriculture, cities, and metalworking by thousands of years. Its builders possessed advanced symbolic language, architectural planning, and astronomical knowledge, yet they lived in an era previously assumed to be primitive. If Göbekli Tepe could exist before agriculture, then why could a megalithic culture not have existed before Egypt? A culture capable of aligning stone monuments with cycles of the heavens. There are hints from across the world. Underwater ruins off Japan, stone circles older than the pyramids in the British Isles, megalithic structures in Siberia and Peru that challenge conventional timelines. They share characteristics that should not coexist. Prehistoric age, advanced stonework, perfect geometry. A global memory fragmented across continents. What if the Giza Plateau is the most complete surviving remnant of such a culture? The Egyptians certainly believed they inherited something ancient. Their myths speak of Zep Tepi, the first time, when gods gifted knowledge to humanity and ruled before the dynasties began. These gods were described not as supernatural beings, but as wise rulers, teachers, engineers, healers. Over time, myths distort, memories blur, and heroes become deities. But behind every myth is a kernel of truth. What if Zep Tepi refers not to divine beings, but to the remnants of a pre-cataclysmic civilization the Egyptians encountered? Imagine nomads wandering the Nile Valley after the great floods receded, discovering a vast stone monument already standing. Imagine their awe, their fear, their wonder. Imagine how stories of the ancestors of stone might evolve over generations into tales of gods who walked among humans. When the Egyptians emerged as a kingdom, the plateau was already regarded as sacred ground. Khufu, ambitious and shrewd, would have seen the power of associating his reign with the ancient structures. By adding his name, carving limited inscriptions, and modifying certain elements, he could transform an incomprehensible relic into a symbol of his divine kingship. This reinterpretation becomes clearer when you examine the interior of the Great Pyramid. There is a deliberate absence of decoration, a stark contrast to other Egyptian funerary structures. Egyptians painted, carved, and inscribed everything, from coffins to temple walls, yet the supposed tomb of their greatest pharaoh was left bare. No hieroglyphs, no religious texts, no ceremonial markings, just smooth, silent stone. Later pyramids were heavily ornamented with funerary texts, elaborate paintings, and royal symbolism, because later pyramids were created within the known religious framework of Egypt. But the Great Pyramid stands apart, alien in its architectural silence. The more one examines it, the more it behaves not like a tomb, but like a machine. The resonance within the king's chamber, the acoustic properties of the grand gallery, the curious dimensions of the shafts, each speaks of function, not symbolism. Some researchers have proposed that the pyramid served as a form of energy generator, a resonance chamber, a stabilization structure, or a star marker. These ideas remain speculative, but they arise from real physical properties found within the structure. Even if the speculative models overshoot the truth, they confirm one thing. The interior of the pyramid was engineered, not merely decorated or ritualized. Across ancient traditions, knowledge was often encoded in architecture. Early societies built monuments aligned with solstices, equinoxes, star risings, and lunar cycles. Stone structures acted as calendars, observatories, and memory devices. If the Great Pyramid belongs to this lineage, then its internal geometry might encode information not yet deciphered, information the Egyptians preserved but did not fully understand. Outside, the context deepens. The three pyramids of Giza form a pattern that mirrors the belt stars of Orion at a specific epoch. But this alignment matches the sky not in 2500 BCE, but in 10,500 BCE, an era when the climate of northern Africa was drastically different and when the Sphinx would have faced a rising Leo during the spring equinox. The monuments seem arranged to reflect a cosmic message anchored to a much older sky. Perhaps they were meant to preserve the memory of a world-ending event, a celestial cycle, or a story written in starlight for future generations to discover. It is not only the stars that whisper of an older age. The foundational blocks around the Great Pyramid show signs of subsidence, sinking into the bedrock over a period far longer than the pharaohs' reigns. The casing stones, once smooth and shining, were placed with such precision that razor-thin gaps were filled with mortar of a type stronger than the stones themselves. The quarrying, transport, and fitting of these stones would have required logistics and expertise that stretched beyond the known capabilities of early dynastic Egypt. When you examine certain blocks closely, the weathering on them suggests they once sat exposed to the elements long before the smoother, newer stones were placed above them. The plateau contains layers, literal and metaphorical, mirroring the history of its construction. Some blocks show erosion from extreme moisture, others from drifting sand, and still others from deliberate human chiseling. It is as if the site was built, abandoned, rediscovered, modified, reinterpreted, and ultimately claimed. A palimpsest of civilizations, each adding their touch, each constructing their own meaning. Standing before the Great Pyramid today, the modern visitor sees a single monument. But in reality, it is a conversation between epochs, a structure born from the hands of an unknown people, inherited by the Egyptians, studied by the Greeks, interpreted by scholars, and now questioned by those willing to look beyond dogma. The pyramid is not a symbol of Egypt alone. It is a symbol of humanity's lost chapters, of forgotten ingenuity, of vanished worlds. If the Great Pyramid truly predates the Old Kingdom, then the timeline of history must be rewritten, not by small margins, but by millennia. Civilizations may have risen and fallen long before the Nile Kingdom was born. Knowledge may have been lost, rediscovered, and lost again. The ancestors of the Egyptians may have walked among ruins they believed were built by gods, not realizing they were witnessing the last footprints of a world erased. The question grows larger with every clue examined. What was the original purpose of the Great Pyramid? If not a tomb, then what? Was it a sanctuary of knowledge, a marker of the heavens, a stabilizing node for a world threatened by environmental upheaval? Was it a beacon, a message, a memory? Was it an attempt to preserve something from a dying civilization? A geometry meant to outlast catastrophe? Or was it something simpler and yet more profound? A monument meant to say, "We were here, we understood, we built with the sky in mind." As darkness thickens over the plateau, the pyramid becomes a silhouette, a black triangle carved against the night sky. The stars shimmer above it, the wind moves across its stones, and the desert keeps its secrets. Whatever the truth is, it waits in the silence between the past and the present, in the gap between what we have been taught and what the evidence quietly insists. And the deeper we descend into this mystery, the more we sense that the Great Pyramid's true story has yet to be told, its earliest chapter buried beneath layers of sand, time, and human assumption. There is a hidden tension running through every discussion about the Great Pyramid, a quiet friction between what we can measure and what we are willing to believe. The monument stands not only as an engineering mystery, but as a psychological one, because accepting the possibility of an older origin requires loosening our grip on the comforting timeline of human progress. It demands that we entertain the idea that our species has lived through cycles of knowledge and loss, that civilizations can rise to extraordinary heights only to vanish almost without trace, that the sands covering Giza may also be covering the mistakes of our own assumptions. And nowhere is this tension more visible than when we follow the clues that lead far beyond the plateau. Clues carved not only in stone, but in myth, memory, and the architecture of cultures separated by oceans and millennia. The pyramid's geometry is the first thread that pulls us into this wider story. Its proportions reflect constants embedded in the natural world. Its base perimeter corresponds to 4 times the Earth's radius at one scale. Its height corresponds to the Earth's radius at another. Its alignment is so precise that even modern surveyors marvel at how such accuracy could be achieved without advanced instruments. And its placement seems chosen not just for stability, but for meaning. Situated on a latitude rich with mathematical coincidences, as though the site was selected with knowledge of the planet as a whole. If the pyramid is indeed older than the pharaohs, then this global perspective hints at a culture whose worldview extended far beyond local terrain. It suggests people who were mapping cycles, patterns, and cosmic rhythms long before recorded history. From Egypt, the trail of impossibilities stretches outward like veins. Across the Mediterranean, the island of Malta holds megalithic temples older than the pyramids, structures with strange acoustic properties, carved chambers, and alignment to solstices. In Turkey, Göbekli Tepe predates cities and agriculture, yet its builders carved intricate pillars weighing tons. In Peru, at Sacsayhuaman, megaliths slot together with such uncanny precision that even a sheet of paper cannot slide between them. In Bolivia, at Pumapunku, blocks are shaped with geometric perfection that appears machine-made. These sites do not share culture, language, or geography, yet they share a perplexing fingerprint. Techniques thousands of years ahead of their time. Mainstream archaeology attempts to disconnect these sites, attributing each to separate bursts of ingenuity, each an isolated phenomenon. But perhaps they are fragments of a larger pattern, a memory scattered across continents. If a global civilization existed before the Younger Dryas collapse, its survivors would have carried knowledge outward like seeds, planting the remnants of a forgotten scientific worldview in different regions. Over generations, that knowledge would erode, distorted by oral repetition, fragmented by isolation, mythologized by people trying to make sense of relics they could not reproduce. Standing at the edge of the Great Pyramid's shadow, one begins to sense that Egypt may not mark the birthplace of an ancient revelation, but rather the place where its echoes are loudest. The Egyptians themselves left clues to this inheritance. Their creation myths describe Zep Tepi, the first time, when civilization was brought forth not by their ancestors but by beings who came before them, wise figures who restored order after chaos. These beings were not depicted as pharaohs or kings, but as hybrid figures blending human and animal features, symbolic representations of forces beyond ordinary existence. Myths often blend memory with metaphor, but the Egyptians took these stories seriously, preserving them in temple inscriptions, funerary texts, and oral tradition. For them, the first time was not merely symbolic. It was a period of real events shrouded in the haze of antiquity. If the Egyptians encountered remnants of a pre-cataclysmic civilization, they would have recorded its memory the only way they knew how, through religious language, mythological layering, and symbolic interpretation. Over centuries, truths become legends, legends become myths, and myths become the framework of belief. But the underlying narrative remains. Something came before. It is tempting to imagine what the world looked like during that forgotten era. The Sahara was not yet a desert. It was a savanna dotted with lakes and rivers. Northern Africa supported animals that would later be found in regions like Kenya and Tanzania: elephants, giraffes, antelope. Rain fell regularly, and the Nile's floodplain was much broader. People migrating through this region would have encountered fertile ground, abundant wildlife, and stable climates. If a civilization arose here with advanced knowledge of geometry, astronomy, and engineering, it would have had the environmental foundation to flourish. And then, suddenly, the world changed. The Younger Dryas period, around 10,800 BCE, brought intense climatic upheaval. Something catastrophic occurred, whether a comet impact, massive solar event, or abrupt meltwater pulse. Temperatures plummeted, rain vanished, seas rose, floods swept across continents, regions once green transformed into deserts. If an advanced culture existed then, its cities could have been swallowed by rising seas or buried beneath layers of sediment. Only their most durable creations, monuments carved from bedrock, might survive. The Great Pyramid may be one such survivor. Its geometry does not merely reflect Earth's measurements. It may encode memories of this global catastrophe. The angle of 51.84 degrees, the ratio of slope to height, the alignment of the passages. These could have served as warnings or records, written in the universal language of mathematics. If knowledge was meant to endure beyond disaster, stone, shaped with cosmic precision, was the safest medium. Inside the pyramid, the chambers may also reflect this intention. Their proportions mirror harmonic ratios known to influence resonance, suggesting that the structure was designed to interact with sound, energy, or environmental frequencies. Perhaps the builders understood natural forces we are only beginning to rediscover. Perhaps they observed Earth not just as a planet, but as a system, a dynamic entity affected by cycles, rhythms, and celestial alignments. One cannot help but consider the pyramid's near indestructibility. Earthquakes have shaken the region, empires have risen and fallen, invaders have stripped casing stones, yet the core structure remains untouched. Its design distributes weight with near-perfect symmetry. Its internal temperature remains stable. Its foundations are anchored into the plateau at a depth that exceeds what would be necessary for a simple tomb. This durability suggests a purpose far beyond funerary ritual. As the sun rises over Giza, the first rays hitting the apex, the pyramid seems less like a tomb and more like a monument built to endure a world-ending event. Its orientation to true north, its internal corridors, its layered structure, all resemble the hallmarks of a construction meant to survive floods, earth shifts, or even long-term climatic changes. Perhaps the original builders intended the pyramid to be found by a later civilization emerging from the ruins. Perhaps its purpose was not religious, but instructive. If the Egyptians discovered the structure in an already ancient state, their choice to repurpose it makes sense. They incorporated it into their cultural landscape, reinterpreting its silence as divine mystery. They added their own architectural works nearby: temples, causeways, subsidiary pyramids, structures clearly built with Old Kingdom methods, contrasting sharply with the precision of the Great Pyramid's earliest layers. When modern archaeologists assume that all these were built at the same time, the contradictions become puzzles. But when viewed as layers of a site inherited across eras, the inconsistencies resolve into a coherent narrative. The Egyptians built around something they did not create. Further north, ancient Greeks who visited Egypt were puzzled by the pyramid's age. Some historians, such as Herodotus, recorded Egyptian claims that the structure was far older than their own dynasty. Others described the colossal monument as already weathered beyond its supposed age. But these observations were dismissed over centuries as misunderstandings. Only now, with modern geological tools and renewed willingness to challenge conventions, do these ancient testimonies regain their significance. What makes the pyramid's age even more enigmatic is what lies beneath the plateau. Recent surveys using ground-penetrating radar and advanced imaging techniques reveal tunnels, chambers, and cavities deep within the bedrock. Some appear to be natural fissures, later shaped by human hands. Others seem entirely artificial, carved with intention. These subterranean structures expand the site's complexity and suggest phases of construction separated by vast stretches of time. The deeper layers often show more weathering than the upper ones, hinting that they might be far older. Imagine an ancient group choosing this plateau not merely for convenience, but because they understood its geology, its stability, and its relationship to celestial markers. They might have been preserving knowledge in stone, embedding mathematical constants, astronomical alignments, and symbolic messages that could survive the collapse of their civilization. In this sense, the pyramid becomes a time capsule, not of objects, but of ideas. The Egyptians accessed only the uppermost chapters of this capsule. They added their names where they could, carved modest inscriptions in the relieving chambers, and wove the pyramid into their conception of kingship and the afterlife. But they left the deeper layers untouched, perhaps out of reverence or out of fear, or simply because they did not understand their purpose. Some anomalies resist even speculative explanation. For example, the stone blocks in the king's chamber resonate at specific frequencies when struck, as though tuned like an instrument. Granite, rich in quartz, is piezoelectric, capable of generating an electrical charge under pressure. Why would the builders choose such a material for the core chamber of a structure of this scale? Why shape it with tolerances finer than any tomb required? Why align the chamber precisely along energy nodes created by the pyramid's geometry? Even the shafts that extend from the chamber defy conventional explanations. They are too narrow for ventilation, too angled for symbolic alignment alone, and too precisely cut to be accidents. Their endpoints correspond not just to stars, but to significant constellations at specific epochs, further reinforcing the theory that the pyramid preserves information about Earth's relationship to the sky. As one descends from the pyramid toward the Nile, the weight of these questions becomes heavier, not lighter. The entire landscape shifts from a historical site to a palimpsest, a text written, erased, rewritten, and obscured through time. The Egyptians left their signatures boldly across the plateau, but beneath their inscriptions lie older chapters, written in the language of stone. There is something else, a subtle but unavoidable pattern. In every region where megalithic architecture appears, myths of a lost age accompany it. In Egypt, it is Zep Tepi. In Mesopotamia, it is the time before the flood. In India, it is the Yuga cycles. In Greece, it is the age of Kronos. In the Americas, it is the world before the great inundation. These myths do not describe a simple past but a golden age destroyed by cataclysm, followed by a rebirth of humanity in a diminished form. If all these stories arose independently, why do they converge so precisely? Why does every culture speak of destruction followed by forgetting, rebuilding, and rediscovery? Why do they insist that knowledge was given to humans by mysterious predecessors, teachers, giants, gods, watchers, sages? Perhaps because they are remembering the same event through different cultural lenses. If the Great Pyramid predates Egypt, then it may be one of the few physical remnants of that forgotten world. Its builders might have etched their greatest understanding into a structure designed to survive the turning of ages. They may have accepted that their civilization would fall, that knowledge would be lost, and that only a monument of staggering durability could carry their legacy forward. And so they built a mountain of meaning, wrapped in geometry, aligned to the heavens, anchored to the earth. A monument that could outlast ice ages, floods, and deserts. A monument that could whisper to future generations if only they were willing to listen. When the Egyptians found it, they filled the silence with their own stories. When the Greeks studied it, they wrapped it in philosophy. When modern scholars examined it, they tried to fit it neatly into timelines that did not consider cataclysm or forgotten cultures. And yet the pyramid remains, larger than any theory, older than any inscription, silent but persistent. As night settles over the plateau and the wind sweeps across the stone, one is left with a feeling not of mystery alone, but of responsibility. The Great Pyramid is not merely a relic. It is a question, a challenge posed across millennia. Its builders might have known that understanding it fully would require a civilization capable of seeing beyond its own assumptions. And now, as we stand at the edge of its shadow, we begin to sense that the true story of the pyramid does not lie in the past alone. It stretches forward, inviting us to reconsider who we are, how many times humanity has risen and fallen, and what we might discover if we dare to read the world's oldest monument not as a tomb, but as a message. There are moments in history when the truth seems to rise like heat above desert sand, distorted, shimmering, almost visible, yet refusing to become solid. The Great Pyramid stands at the center of one such moment. Every attempt to define it collapses under its own weight because the monument refuses to behave the way a tomb should, refuses to conform to the limits of the civilization to which it has been assigned, refuses to fit neatly inside the historical narratives we have written. When you peel back the layers, when you follow the anomalies without flinching, you reach a point where the standard explanation no longer suffices. Something older, something stranger, something deeper must be accounted for. And that realization leads to a cascade of questions that stretch far beyond Egypt, threading into the roots of human memory. Most grand structures are built on top of earlier, smaller ones. Civilizations evolve step by step, testing, failing, refining their techniques. But the Great Pyramid appears backward. It is as if the first attempt was the most flawless. After it, everything declines. Later pyramids tilt, crumble, collapse. Their cores are riddled with sand and rubble. Their alignments drift. They look like imitations of a masterpiece their builders did not fully understand. The Pyramid of Khufu stands alone, like a mathematical monolith, a structure too precise to have predecessors and too perfect to have followers. And this dissonance, this impossible placement at the peak of an architectural arc, forces us to consider whether the Egyptians truly built it from scratch. If the Great Pyramid were the culmination of a long developmental chain, we would expect earlier prototypes nearby, partial attempts, lesser pyramids inching toward perfection. We would expect texts describing its construction, records of quarrying, lists of workers, ceremonial accounts of its completion. Instead, none of this exists. The pyramid arrives in history like a revelation, fully formed and silent. Not a single inscription describes how it was built. Not one blueprint, not one carving, not even a myth directly recounting its creation. For the Egyptians, who recorded everything from embalming instructions to bread recipes, this silence borders on the unbelievable. To fill this silence, later dynasties projected their narratives onto the structure, assigning it to Khufu because a handful of red paint marks in an internal relieving chamber bore his cartouche. But even these markings remain hotly debated. Their placement, their authenticity, and their implications raise more questions than they answer. If the Egyptians truly built the pyramid, why is its interior devoid of their iconography? Why would the most sacred and grandest tomb ever constructed be left undecorated, uninscribed, and inaccessible? The absence feels less like neglect and more like respect, like a discovery too ancient and revered to alter. This leads us to the foundation, not just physical, but conceptual. The proportions of the pyramid mirror relationships embedded in nature and the cosmos. The ratio between its base and height encodes P and F. Its placement on Earth corresponds to geodetic alignments that seem intentional, as though the builders understood the planet's shape, size, and relationship to the heavens. Such knowledge would not arise suddenly in a Bronze Age society. It implies continuity, a lineage of observation and measurement stretching deep into prehistory, perhaps through generations who watched the stars not as symbols, but as navigational tools, calendars, and warnings. If this lineage existed, where did it begin, and what force shattered it? To answer this, we must step outside Egypt and follow the trail of megalithic architecture across continents. Structures separated by thousands of miles share traits that should not logically intersect. Precise stone cutting, polygonal masonry, astronomical alignment, and harmonious proportions appear in places with no known cultural contact. It is as though fragments of a forgotten worldview survived the collapse of an earlier age, carried by scattered groups into new lands. In Peru, enormous walls rise in complex interlocking patterns, each stone shaped with angles and curves that fit like puzzle pieces. Such craftsmanship suggests an understanding of vibration, load distribution, and seismic resistance that surpasses many modern buildings. At Göbekli Tepe, circular temples carved more than 11,000 years ago appear suddenly, with no evolution leading up to them. In Easter Island, the Moai statues stare inland, remnants of a culture whose engineering feats remain mysterious. And in Turkey, submerged off the coast, lies the ancient city of Derinkuyu, an underground labyrinth carved with astonishing precision, capable of housing tens of thousands. These anomalies point not to isolated sparks, but to a dispersed inheritance. In this context, the Great Pyramid appears less like an isolated wonder and more like the apex of a global pattern, a surviving artifact from a civilization capable of extraordinary feats, a civilization erased by catastrophe but remembered in myth. To explore the pyramid's deeper story, we must also consider the land beneath it. The Giza Plateau was not chosen arbitrarily. It is a geomorphological fortress, a massive limestone shelf positioned above the Nile floodplain. Its layers are dense, stable, and remarkably resistant to erosion. Any structure built upon it would endure far longer than buildings founded on softer soil. If a culture sought to create monuments that could withstand millennia of environmental trauma, floods, earthquakes, climatic shifts, this would be the ideal location. But it is not merely the plateau's stability that matters. Its orientation to the cardinal directions is uncanny. The three major pyramids align not only to true north, but to each other with geometric precision. Their layout mirrors the belt of Orion at a specific epoch, and their positioning relative to the Sphinx aligns with the rising sun on the equinoxes. These alignments shift across thousands of years due to the precession of Earth's axis. When traced backward, they point to a time far older than dynastic Egypt, an era when the Sahara was green and rainfall carved deep channels into the bedrock. During this era, the Sphinx enclosure shows signs of heavy water erosion. Vertical grooves etched by rainfall long vanished from this region tell a different story than the desert climate of Khufu's reign. These marks suggest that the Sphinx, and by extension, the earliest monuments on the plateau, were carved thousands of years before the Old Kingdom, when the world was in the grip of profound climatic instability. Could the pyramid also bear scars of this forgotten time? If the lower blocks of the structure show different weathering patterns from the upper layers, it might indicate multiple phases of construction, some predating Egypt itself. Some researchers argue that the core of the pyramid is older than the casing layers added later by the Egyptians. The distinctions between block sizes, construction techniques, and weathering support this possibility. The Egyptians may have found the core structure intact and built around it, adapting it to their beliefs. They restored casing stones, built temples nearby, and integrated the pyramid into their cosmology. But its heart remained beyond their understanding. This pattern echoes across the world. Later, civilizations repurposing the architecture of earlier, forgotten ones. The Inca built atop megalithic foundations. Medieval Europeans built churches over pagan sites. Humans inherit, reinterpret, and overwrite, yet the stones remember. Inside the Great Pyramid, this palimpsest becomes even more evident. The passages, chambers, and shafts follow a logic not fully consistent with Egyptian funerary architecture. The so-called Queen's Chamber aligns with resonant points within the structure. The Grand Gallery's corbelled construction creates a channel with perfect acoustics. Even the shafts from the King's Chamber point toward celestial markers at specific epochs, markers that do not match the sky of Khufu's time. The pyramid's interior feels like a machine designed to channel forces, resonate with frequencies, or preserve knowledge through geometry. The Egyptians used stone to represent the afterlife, but the pyramid's design seems less symbolic and more functional. The absence of decoration is not a flaw. It is a clue. This is not a tomb adorned with the story of a king, but a silent engine built for a purpose lost to time. What could that purpose be? One possibility is that the pyramid was meant as a stabilizer, a structure designed to withstand and record the trauma of a world in transition. If the climate swung violently, if floods drowned coastlines, if cosmic events disrupted the Earth's surface, then building monuments that could survive and signal vital information to future generations would be a rational response. The use of stone, geometry, and celestial markers would be universal, transcending language and culture. Another possibility is that the pyramid served as a repository of knowledge. Its proportions encode mathematical truths that would aid any civilization capable of deciphering them. If a society understood that catastrophes occurred cyclically, then preserving information about Earth, the sky, and time itself would be essential. Geometry becomes a form of immortality. But there is an even deeper possibility. What if the pyramid was part of a larger network, an ancient global system of markers, observatories, or energy hubs? Many megalithic sites align to magnetic anomalies, ley lines, or geographical grids. If a pre-cataclysmic civilization observed global patterns, tectonic shifts, magnetic variations, celestial cycles, they might have constructed monuments that interacted with these forces. The Great Pyramid, with its quartz-rich granite chambers, piezoelectric properties, and resonant geometry, could have been a node within this system. The idea sounds speculative, yet the physical evidence remains. The pyramid behaves like a resonant cavity. The king's chamber vibrates at specific frequencies. The Grand Gallery amplifies sound in unusual ways. Electrical anomalies have been recorded at the apex. Ancient cultures might not have framed these effects in modern scientific terms, but they would have understood their practical implications. When you exit the pyramid and walk along the base, you see the stark contrast between the weathered foundation stones and the smoother casing remnants. The lower layers look ancient, older than the desert, older than the civilization around them. Their erosion tells a story not of 3,000 or 4,000 years, but of thousands more across climatic ages. If the foundation predates the Egyptians and the core structure shows multiple construction phases, then the site may have been continuously used, abandoned, reused, and reinterpreted across epochs. This layered narrative becomes clearer when examining the surrounding monuments. The Sphinx Temple, built from limestone blocks carved out of the Sphinx enclosure, displays erosion far exceeding that of nearby pyramids attributed to the Old Kingdom. Its walls bear marks of hydrological wear, suggesting it was exposed to heavy rainfall in an era much older than the dynasties. The Valley Temple nearby shares similar traits: massive blocks, tight joints, weathering inconsistent with the desert climate. If these structures predate the Egyptians, then the entire Giza plateau may be a relic of a prehistoric civilization, a place chosen for reasons we no longer understand, a place where knowledge was embedded in stone. Egyptian mythology echoes this idea. Their texts claim that in the first time, gods walked the earth and built monuments aligned to the stars. These gods were not celestial beings, but ancestors from a forgotten age. Over time, humans deified them, transforming cultural memory into religious doctrine. But beneath the myth lies a clue. The Egyptians believed their grandest monuments were inheritances, not inventions. As the sun dips and shadows lengthen, the Great Pyramid's geometry becomes sharper, its edges glowing as if lit from within. The structure seems to breathe, shifting with the passing light. In this moment, the pyramid feels less like an artifact and more like a presence, ancient, patient, and aware. It stands as a witness to eras lost, to civilizations erased, to catastrophes that reset the world. And it remains not as a tomb, but as a silent challenge. If the pyramid is older than Egypt, then we are not living at the dawn of civilization, but somewhere in the middle of a much longer story. Humanity may have risen, fallen, and risen again. The gaps in our memory may be wider than we admit. The ancient world may have been far more complex than the fragments we have found. And the Great Pyramid may be the last intact chapter of a book we have yet to understand. There is something humbling about standing before it, about feeling the chill of dusk settle over the plateau, while the ancient stones absorb the fading warmth of the sun. It is a reminder of how small we are within the sweep of time, how fragile our assumptions are, how incomplete our knowledge remains. The pyramid invites us not to believe, but to question, to look beyond the boundaries imposed by convention and explore the possibility that history is deeper, darker, and far more extraordinary than we dare imagine. And as night gathers, the pyramid's silhouette merges with the stars, its apex pointing toward constellations that shift slowly across millennia. It feels as though the monument is speaking, not in words, but in alignments, proportions, and echoes, a message carved in stone, waiting for a species willing to listen. There are places on Earth where time seems to fold in on itself, where the boundaries between epochs blur, and the present moment feels like a thin veil stretched over something ancient and unresolved. The Giza Plateau is one of those places. The closer you look, the more the edges of accepted history begin to fray, and the more the landscape reveals its stubborn refusal to conform to the timeline assigned to it. The Great Pyramid stands at the center of this contradiction, but it is not alone. Around it, beneath it, and extending far beyond it, a web of enigmas stretches across Egypt, enigmas that begin to hint at a much older story, one woven through geology, astronomy, engineering, and myth. When you walk south toward the remnants of the so-called lost city of the pyramids, the evidence becomes almost overwhelming. Archaeologists found bakeries, workshops, and houses here, remains attributed to the workers who built the pyramids. But the layers tell a different tale. The city shows clear phases of occupation, abandonment, and reoccupation. Some sections date to the Old Kingdom, others to much later periods, but beneath them lies a deeper stratum that predates dynastic civilization. Pottery fragments, charcoal deposits, and traces of water channels speak of human presence in a climate far wetter than Khufu's era. The plateau was inhabited long before the pharaohs, and whoever lived here left subtle marks, footprints erased by shifting sands, but still lingering in the soil. The further one moves across the plateau, the more one notices that the alignment of structures does not follow the improvisational logic of a civilization developing gradually. Instead, the layout appears pre-conceptualized, as if a master plan existed long before the Egyptians began adding their temples and mastabas. The causeways connecting the pyramids follow precise orientations relative to celestial events. The Valley Temple beside the Sphinx is built not from typical Egyptian blocks, but from megalithic stones weighing hundreds of tons, stones so massive that even modern cranes would struggle to move them. These blocks are fitted with tight joints and surfaces that appear machine-cut, lacking the chisel marks characteristic of later Egyptian constructions. The Valley Temple and the Sphinx Temple share this impossible craftsmanship. Their limestone blocks show deep water erosion, suggesting exposure to centuries of rainfall that ended thousands of years before Egypt's first kings. If these structures predate the desert, then their builders lived in a world unrecognizably different from the one we associate with ancient Egypt, a world of grasslands, monsoons, and freshwater lakes, a world long forgotten. What emerges is a pattern. The deeper you dig, the older and more advanced the stonework becomes. The Egyptians built upon these foundations, but their contributions lack the same precision. Their stones are smaller, their alignments less exact, their techniques markedly different. The transition between the original megalithic layers and the later Egyptian additions is visible to the naked eye, like two voices speaking in the same place but from different centuries. This discrepancy is not an anomaly confined to Giza. It echoes across Egypt. At Abydos, a mysterious structure known as the Osirian sits buried deep below the temple of Seti Deformed. The Osirian is built from enormous granite blocks, arranged in a style completely unlike Egyptian temple architecture. It resembles more closely the megalithic sites of Peru or the foundations of ancient Lebanon. Scholars struggle to explain why the Egyptians would bury such a structure, or why its construction differs so drastically from the ornate temple that stands above it. The simplest explanation may also be the most startling. The Osirian predates the temple of Seti, and Seti built his temple atop an ancient, revered site that already existed in antiquity. At Saqqara, beneath the step pyramid of Djoser, lies another riddle. The underground galleries are lined with polished granite, carved with precision far beyond what one would expect of a supposedly early pyramid. The granite boxes in the Serapeum, massive sarcophagi weighing up to 70 tons, are fitted with lids so exact that the seals remain airtight after millennia. The interiors of these boxes are smooth and symmetrical, as though carved with advanced machinery, yet no inscriptions explain their purpose. The Egyptians left dozens of giant boxes, each perfectly engineered, each empty, each silent. Their function remains unknown. These sites, scattered across Egypt, share one unmistakable trait. The deeper the layer, the more sophisticated the craftsmanship. Civilizations typically progress from simple to complex, from rough to refined. But in Egypt, the oldest structures often appear to be the most advanced. This inversion challenges the linear timeline we rely on. It suggests inheritance rather than innovation. It suggests memory rather than invention. It suggests a forgotten chapter, one erased by catastrophe, remembered only through architecture that refuses to vanish. To unravel this enigma, one must look beyond Egypt's borders. Megalithic architecture appears in places separated by oceans: Peru, Turkey, Japan, Lebanon, Easter Island. Yet these cultures were not connected in the traditional sense. They shared no known trade routes, no written exchanges, no direct contact. And yet they built with similar methods: enormous blocks, interlocking joints, stones so heavy that their movement defies explanation. This pattern hints at a shared inheritance, a global diffusion of knowledge from a source older than any of these civilizations. If such a source existed, where did it originate? And what caused its disappearance? Ancient myths may hold clues. The Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time. The Sumerians described antediluvian kings. The Greeks wrote of the Golden Age. The Maya recorded previous worlds destroyed by floods. Cultures across the world told stories of a great catastrophe that reset human history: a deluge, a freeze, a firestorm, a falling sky. These are not isolated tales. They form a global pattern. And when scientific evidence is examined, these myths gain unexpected weight. Around 12,800 years ago, something dramatic happened. Temperatures plummeted worldwide. Mega-floods ripped through continents. Ice sheets melted rapidly. Wildfires burned across thousands of miles. The Younger Dryas event carved new landscapes, buried coastlines, and extinguished species. If an advanced civilization existed at that time, one capable of building megalithic structures, it would have faced annihilation. Cities near coastlines would have drowned. Inland communities would have starved or fled. Knowledge would have been lost except for what could be preserved in stone. If the Great Pyramid predates dynastic Egypt, then it may be a survivor of that cataclysm, a monument built during an age when the climate supported a very different world. Its engineering sophistication would make sense in the context of a culture that developed over thousands of years before the catastrophe. Its astronomical alignments might encode memories of a sky before the cosmic event. Its geometry might contain information designed to survive the ages. Imagine a people standing at the brink of destruction, aware that the cycles of the earth were shifting, that their world was ending. They would turn to stone, the one material capable of surviving floods, fire, and time. They would build markers aligned to the stars, hoping that future civilizations would decipher the message. They would embed knowledge into architecture, knowing that stories fade, but geometry endures. And perhaps that is what the Great Pyramid is. Not a tomb, but a message. Not a monument to death, but a monument to survival. The deeper you look, the more plausible this becomes. The internal passages of the pyramid align with specific star risings that correspond not to the Old Kingdom, but to much earlier epochs. The descending passage appears to have targeted the star Thuban at a time thousands of years before Khufu. The shafts from the king's chamber align with Orion and Sirius, but at angles matching their positions in a sky long predating dynastic Egypt. This astronomical dating aligns remarkably with the era just before the Younger Dryas collapse. The builders seem to have been marking a moment in time, a celestial configuration frozen in stone. If the sky served as their calendar, then the pyramid becomes a time capsule pointing to an age older than we dare to imagine. Furthermore, the pyramid's geometry encodes the length of the year with incredible accuracy. Its proportions reflect planetary constants that were not officially recognized by science until millennia later. This cannot be coincidence. Such precision suggests observation over immense timescales consistent with a civilization that may have lived through climatic cycles we no longer remember. Yet the Egyptians, brilliant as they were, show no evidence of developing this level of mathematical astronomy. Their texts describe the stars symbolically, not scientifically. Their temples align to solar events, but not with the precision found in the Great Pyramid. Their achievements, while extraordinary, do not reach the level of sophistication embedded in the pyramid's oldest layers. This discrepancy suggests that the pyramid was not the product of their discoveries, but the inheritance of their destiny. Walking through the interior of the pyramid, the air grows heavier, almost electric. The granite blocks emit a faint echo when touched, as though the stone itself holds memory. The chambers feel intentional, their proportions exact, their acoustics tuned. Some modern researchers have observed unusual electromagnetic anomalies inside the structure, weak fields that intensify near the king's chamber. These anomalies are not supernatural, they are physical, measurable, and consistent with the quartz content of the granite and the resonant dimensions of the space. If the builders understood these properties, they may have engineered the pyramid to harness natural forces, forces modern science is only beginning to explore. But even without invoking advanced technology, the structure's engineering brilliance stands unmatched. The corners are aligned to true north with an accuracy almost impossible to replicate without modern instruments. The casing stones once formed a polished surface, reflecting sunlight so intensely that ancient texts claimed the pyramid shone like a star. The leveling of the base is nearly perfect, deviating less than a fraction of an inch across 13 acres. These feats suggest more than skill, they suggest mastery. The more one examines the evidence, the clearer the pattern becomes. The Egyptians inherited a landscape rich with ancient knowledge. They honored it, built around it, added to it, and interpreted it through their religious lens. But they did not create its oldest, grandest structures. They found them, and they were likely not the first to find them. Before the Egyptians, nomadic groups wandered the Nile Valley during the early Holocene. Some settled along the river, domesticating plants and animals. Others traveled across what is now the Sahara, fishing in lakes that have long since evaporated. These groups may have encountered ruins, monuments built by a people whose memory had already faded into legend. Over time, those legends became myths of gods, giants, and divine kings. What if the Egyptians were simply the first literate culture to record the stories? The pyramid may thus be a relic of a world that existed before the desert, a world erased by water and fire, a world remembered only through stone and myth. And what does this mean for us? If humanity has lived through cycles of rise and collapse, then our current civilization may not be the first to stand at the edge of the unknown. The pyramid may be a warning, a reminder that the earth changes, that disasters come unexpectedly, and that knowledge must be preserved in ways that can survive millennia. Perhaps the builders understood that the cycles of the earth are relentless, that civilizations fall as surely as stars move across the sky. They may have built the pyramid not out of fear, but out of responsibility, ensuring that their greatest insights would endure beyond their own lives. As night descends on the plateau, a silence settles over the desert, a silence that feels not empty, but watchful. The Great Pyramid becomes a silhouette against the stars, a shape so familiar yet so alien in its purpose. It stands as a monument not just to antiquity, but to memory itself, a testament to a world lost, a message from an age forgotten, a question carved in stone, a question waiting for us to answer. There is a strange stillness that settles over the Giza plateau just before dawn, a moment when the air grows motionless and even the wind seems to hesitate. In that quiet threshold between night and morning, the Great Pyramid casts an elongated shadow across the desert, and the entire landscape feels suspended between worlds. It is here, in this muted half-light, that the weight of unanswered questions becomes almost physical. The pyramid looms not as a relic of the past, but as a presence aware of its own significance, as if it has carried something across ages and is waiting, patiently, silently, for a civilization capable of understanding it. To explore this possibility, one must step beyond traditional archaeology and confront the deeper patterns woven through ancient humanity. These patterns stretch far beyond Egypt, far beyond the Nile, and even beyond the known boundaries of early civilization. The Great Pyramid is only the most visible beacon of a mystery that circles the earth. And to see the larger picture, one must be willing to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth. History, as we know it, is incomplete. Across the world, remnants of ancient structures defy explanation. Their stones whisper of a knowledge older than recorded time, a lineage of understanding lost to catastrophe. In the mountains of Peru, stones weighing dozens of tons fit together so precisely that even centuries of earthquakes have failed to dislodge them. In the Mediterranean, ancient harbors lie submerged far beneath the sea, their construction dating to an era when those coasts should not have been inhabited. In Turkey, structures buried intentionally beneath the soil reveal craftsmanship predating agriculture. These anomalies form a mosaic, one that, when pieced together, suggests the possibility of a civilization older than any we have acknowledged. If this civilization existed, then the Great Pyramid may have been one of its masterpieces, a monument designed not merely to endure, but to communicate. Its geometry is not ornamental, it is deliberate. Its alignments are not symbolic, they are precise. Its construction is not whimsical, it is methodical, reflecting a world-view rooted in cosmic order. The builders seem to have understood the earth as a sphere, the sky as a clock, and time as a cycle repeating over vast epochs. To grasp the magnitude of their knowledge, one must examine the pyramid's relationship to the earth. Its placement corresponds to a meridian that divides land masses with uncanny equality. Its base dimensions correlate with Earth's circumference when scaled. Its orientation to true north is so exact that even modern engineers struggle to replicate it. This precision implies tools capable of measuring angles, distances, and curvature with extraordinary accuracy. It implies observation over centuries, not decades. It implies a scientific culture far more advanced than the one credited to the early dynasties of Egypt. Standing at the foot of the pyramid, one can almost feel the echo of that earlier age. The lower blocks, weathered and massive, hint at a time when rainfall shaped the land. The upper courses, constructed with smaller stones, reflect later hands. Perhaps Egyptian builders who restored or completed what they inherited. This pattern alignment, ancient foundation, later additions, is mirrored across the plateau. The Sphinx, deeply eroded by water, sits beside temples built from enormous blocks, but later capped with typical Egyptian architecture. The Osirian at Abydos, carved from megalithic stone, lies beneath a temple from a much later era. Time is layered here like sediment. But what happened to the original builders? Why did their civilization vanish so completely that only their stonework survives? To answer this, one must confront the cataclysms that punctuated prehistory. The Younger Dryas event was not a gentle climate shift. It was a global shock. Temperatures plummeted rapidly, ice sheets melted in violent bursts, mega floods carved canyons overnight, fires scorched continents, A civilization, no matter how advanced, living near coastlines or relying on stable climates, would have been devastated. Cities would have vanished beneath rising seas. Knowledge would have been scattered among survivors. Entire regions would have become uninhabitable. In such circumstances, only the most robust records, those carved into stone, would endure. And that brings us back to the Great Pyramid. If it predates these cataclysms, then it becomes more than a monument. It becomes a survivor, a witness, a vessel. Its geometry may encode astronomical relationships important to a civilization rebuilding after devastation. Its alignment may serve as a marker for future generations to recalibrate their understanding of Earth's place in the cosmos. Its chambers may preserve acoustic or energetic properties relevant to the ancient worldview. And its enduring presence may be the ultimate testament to a people determined that their knowledge not be erased by disaster. But if the pyramid is indeed a relic of this lost civilization, then evidence of their presence must exist elsewhere. And it does, though not always in the form we expect. In Egypt, mythology provides subtle clues. The concept of Zep Tepi, the first time, describes an era when gods ruled, when knowledge emerged suddenly, when the world was reordered after chaos. Many interpret this as mythology, but myths often preserve deeper truths disguised as narrative. The gods of Zep Tepi may have been the survivors of an earlier civilization, seen through the reverent eyes of a later culture. Their abilities would seem divine to those without knowledge of the past. Their architecture would seem miraculous, their artifacts incomprehensible. If the Egyptians encountered the remnants of such a people, they would have absorbed their stories into religious ideology. Over centuries, these memories would blur into myth. And as dynasties rose and fell, the original meanings would fade, leaving behind symbols that outlived the truths they once represented. Further afield, similar patterns appear. The Sumerians described kings who reigned for impossibly long lifespans before a great flood. The Greeks wrote of a golden age destroyed by disaster. The Maya recorded cycles of civilization ending in catastrophe. The Inuit tell of a time when the sky fell. The Aboriginal Australians speak of ancestors who fled from a great fire in the sky. These stories echo each other across time and culture, suggesting a shared memory of global trauma. If all these cultures are referencing the same event, a world-altering cataclysm, then it is not unreasonable to consider that a global civilization might have existed before it. Not a single empire, but a network of societies sharing knowledge, connected by travel routes long since submerged. The Great Pyramid may have been one node in that network, located on stable ground chosen for its resilience. As the sun rises higher over Giza, the pyramid's shape changes subtly. Its edges sharpen, its shadow shortens. But its aura remains unchanged, eternal, enigmatic, indifferent to human interpretation. Tourists often describe feeling overwhelmed when standing beside it, a sensation that seems disproportionate to its physical form. But perhaps this reaction is not emotional, but instinctual. Perhaps something deep within the human psyche recognizes the pyramid as more than stone, as a kind of anchor in time. This instinct becomes stronger when examining the pyramid's interior. The corridors, narrow and steep, lead to chambers whose functions remain unknown. The king's chamber, with its precise granite construction, produces resonance frequencies that feel almost alive. The queen's chamber, smaller and quieter, contains features that defy easy explanation. The Grand Gallery, ascending with perfect symmetry, seems built with intention beyond mere passage. These spaces feel engineered, not ceremonial. They feel designed for interaction. In some ways, the pyramid resembles a device more than a tomb. It has chambers aligned to energy nodes, passages directed at stars, resonant materials arranged in harmonic patterns. If one removes the assumption that it was built for burial, its design becomes coherent. It could have been a form of observatory, a stabilizing structure, a knowledge vault, or a tool for measuring cycles of the Earth. Modern science may one day decipher its purpose, but for now, we must rely on patterns. And one pattern is unmistakable. Wherever megalithic architecture appears, advanced geometry follows. In Peru, stone walls reflect modular design principles similar to those found in Egypt. In Turkey, ancient pillars align to celestial markers. In Scotland, stone circles track lunar cycles with astonishing accuracy. These sites do not share culture, but they share technical fingerprints. If these structures were created by different societies, each rediscovering advanced mathematical principles on its own, the coincidence borders on impossible. Far more likely is that these societies inherited their knowledge from a common source, a source older than any of them. That source may have been a civilization living during the last glacial retreat, a people who mastered stone, sky, and time. Their world would have been vast, with coastlines extending far beyond today's. Their cities may now lie underwater, buried beneath sediment, eroded by time. Only their monuments, carved from the hardest stone, remain. And perhaps Egypt was one of their most important locations. The Giza Plateau's geology suggests it was stable even during times of global instability. Its elevation protected it from floods. Its position near the Nile offered access to resources. Its climate, during wetter periods, would have been ideal for settlement. If a civilization sought to build a monument that could survive the ages, this is precisely where they would build it. The Egyptians recognized the plateau as sacred long before they built there. They did not choose it randomly. They inherited its significance. They built temples around older structures, not upon empty land. They adopted its myths. They revered its orientation. And they aligned their own architecture according to principles visible in the pyramid, principles they did not originate. As the day progresses, the pyramid becomes almost blinding in its intensity. Its form, once crisp against the dawn, now shimmers in the heat. It is easy to imagine how it once looked with its casing stones intact, polished limestone reflecting sunlight with such brilliance that it could be seen for miles. In that state, it would have appeared not as a mountain but as a beacon. A beacon for whom? Not for the Egyptians? They were already here. Not for the builders. They already knew its meaning. Perhaps it was for us, or for those who came long before us. A message spanning ages, encoded in a language that does not rely on vocabulary but on universal principles. Mathematics, astronomy, geometry. A language that any civilization capable of curiosity could decipher. If this is true, then the pyramid is not merely ancient, it is intentional. It exists not as a monument to what was, but as a guide for what might be. And perhaps that is the true legacy of the vanished civilization. Not their cities, not their artifacts, not their stories, but their intention. Their belief that knowledge must be preserved across cycles of rise and fall. Their understanding that human memory is fragile, but stone endures. Their willingness to imprint their greatest insights onto a structure capable of outliving them by tens of thousands of years. As the sun begins to set once more and shadows stretch across the plateau, the air cools and the wind returns. The quietness of dawn is gone, replaced by a subtle hum that seems to emanate from the stones themselves. You stand there, watching the pyramid shift from gold to amber to deep shadow, and you cannot help but feel that you are standing in the presence of not just a monument, but a survivor. A survivor of fire, flood, empire, and oblivion. A survivor that may still be speaking. There comes a moment when night descends over the Giza plateau, and the voices of the day fade into silence, when the Great Pyramid feels less like a structure and more like a memory, an echo of something older than history itself. In this darkness, lit only by the drifting glow of distant Cairo and the shimmering stars overhead, the monument seems to breathe differently. Its edges soften, its angles blur, and its massive presence becomes almost weightless, as though it is slipping back into the epoch from which it came. Standing there, with the desert stretching endlessly around you, it becomes impossible to escape the feeling that this place was never meant solely for the world we know. Something about it, its precision, its endurance, its silence, belongs to a deeper timeline. As the wind brushes across the plateau, the ancient stones seem to hum with a resonance that bypasses rational thought. There is a kind of awareness here, not supernatural, but geological, historical, mathematical, a convergence of everything the earth has witnessed and everything humanity has forgotten. The pyramid is more than an artifact. It is an anchor. It holds something in place across the vastness of time, something that refuses to be erased even when entire civilizations vanish. And as we look deeper into its origins, its geometry, its astronomical alignments, and its global similarities, the possibility becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. The Great Pyramid may be the last intact chapter of a story that stretches back to a world lost beneath floodwaters, firestorms, and millennia of forgetting. If this structure predates the Egyptians, then its builders lived in a world utterly unlike ours, a world with different coastlines, different climates, and different constellations dominating the night. Their knowledge of the sky may have come not from symbolic reverence, but from necessity. In a world shifting between glacial cold and violent warming, the sky becomes a map of survival. The movement of stars can predict seasons, migrations, storms, and cycles. A civilization rooted in astronomical precision would have built monuments not as expressions of power, but as tools to anchor time, to measure changes, to preserve knowledge. The Great Pyramid's alignment to true north, so precise that it deviates by only a handful of arc minutes, suggests such a purpose. But even more provocative is its relationship to the Earth's axis of rotation. The pyramid's orientation reflects not just the cardinal directions, but the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble of the Earth that takes nearly 26,000 years to complete. Only a culture observing the sky over vast periods of time could have understood this cycle, and yet here, embedded in the pyramid's proportions, angles, and alignments, is evidence that someone did. This knowledge appears nowhere else in the Egyptian canon. Their star charts were symbolic and mythological, their temples aligned to seasonal events, not long-term celestial cycles. Their mathematics, though impressive, does not reach the sophistication required to encode astronomical constants into architecture. And yet the Great Pyramid contains all of these elements, effortlessly, silently, perfectly. The deeper one delves into the pyramid's dimensions, the more its design reveals layers of knowledge that would have been impossible to acquire without global exploration. The ratio of its height to its perimeter approximates Peichheim. Its slope angle reflects the golden ratio. Its internal chamber layout corresponds to harmonic frequencies. Its base, if projected outward, aligns with significant geodetic markers. These are not coincidences. They are signatures, mathematical fingerprints of a culture possessed of extraordinary understanding. Where did this knowledge come from? To answer that, we must explore the possibility that human history is cyclical, that civilizations rise, collapse, and rise again, leaving only fragments behind. Archaeological records show periods of regression and stagnation, where technologies disappear for centuries only to re-emerge later. In the aftermath of the Younger Dryas event, global population plummeted. Ice sheets melted catastrophically, coastlines shifted dramatically, entire ecosystems vanished. Any coastal civilization, where nearly all advanced societies form, would have been obliterated. Their libraries, ports, temples, and cities would now lie submerged beneath hundreds of feet of water. This pattern repeats across the globe. In India, submerged ruins near Dwarka suggest ancient cities drowned by rising seas. Off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni structure hints at megalithic architecture beneath the waves. In the Mediterranean, remnants of older harbors lie dozens of meters below sea level. These are not isolated cases. They form a global pattern, evidence of human settlement before the end of the Ice Age. If an advanced civilization existed then, its people would have faced unimaginable challenges as the climate shifted violently. They would have been forced inland toward higher ground. They would have sought stable regions where knowledge could be preserved. Egypt, with its rising plateau and proximity to fresh water, would have been ideal. The pyramid may have been one of their last attempts to ensure their legacy survived the cataclysm. Evidence for this interpretation lies not only in the structure itself, but also in the stories that surround it. The Egyptian priests who spoke to Greek historians described a history spanning tens of thousands of years, divided into ages, each ending with disaster. The Greeks dismissed these claims as exaggerations, yet they mirror myths found across the world. The Maya believed in cycles of creation and destruction. The Sumerians recorded dynasties of antediluvian kings. The Hopi spoke of previous worlds wiped out by fire and water. These stories seem to preserve memories of real events, encoded through symbolism after the details were lost. The pyramid fits naturally into this worldview. Its sheer durability suggests it was intended as a message to future ages. Its geometry suggests it was meant to teach, not merely impress. Its orientation suggests it was designed to withstand time, not just celebrate a king. Inside the structure, the chambers offer further clues. The king's chamber, built from massive granite slabs, resonates at frequencies aligned with the dimensions of the earth itself. The grand gallery amplifies sound in ways that feel less like architecture and more like instrumentation. Even the small shafts leading from the chambers align with stars at specific epochs that do not correspond to the Old Kingdom. These features imply function, not ornamentation. If the pyramid was built by a civilization familiar with harmonic resonance, energy distribution, and astronomical cycles, then its purpose might have been far more complex than we imagine. It may have been an observatory, a resonant instrument, a seismic stabilizer, a recording device, or something for which we lack a modern equivalent. The silence surrounding its true function may not reflect mystery. It may reflect our distance from the knowledge required to interpret it. Across Egypt, similar mysteries persist. The Osirion at Abydos, built deep underground from megalithic stones, appears older than the temple above it. The Serapeum's granite boxes exhibit precision that suggests advanced tools. The Sphinx's erosion contradicts its assigned age, pointing to an era when rainfall shaped its enclosure. Again and again, we find the same signature. Older structures appear more advanced, not less. This inversion of expected progress forces us to consider that humanity may have been more technologically or scientifically capable in the distant past than we admit. Not in the sense of electronics or machinery, but in the sense of mastery over stone, geometry, and the natural world. A different kind of advancement, one rooted in observation, long-term thinking, and a worldview attuned to cycles rather than linear progress. If this earlier civilization fell, their survivors would have carried fragments of knowledge into the post-cataclysmic world. Some of these fragments became the seeds of later cultures. Egypt, Sumer, the Indus Valley, Mesoamerica, all may have inherited a fraction of what once existed. Over time, these fragments became myths, religions, and traditions. The Great Pyramid may be the most complete fragment of all, a literal stone archive. As night deepens around the plateau, the pyramid's outline becomes darker and more imposing. Its silence feels intentional, as though it holds its secrets with determination. Yet there is a sense that those secrets are not inaccessible. They are simply encoded in a language we no longer speak. To approach understanding, one must view the pyramid not as a static artifact, but as part of a global pattern. Its proportions reflect Earth's geometry. Its alignments reflect Earth's relationship to the stars. Its construction reflects knowledge of materials and forces. Everywhere one looks, the logic points not to coincidence, but to intention. Perhaps the greatest clue lies not in what the pyramid contains, but in what it lacks. It bears no inscriptions glorifying a king, no funerary texts, no decorative reliefs, no signs of ritual use consistent with Egyptian tombs. It is a monument stripped of narrative, as if the builders wanted the structure itself to be the message. And if the message was meant to span ages, then simplicity and durability make sense. Stories change, languages die, cultures collapse, but geometry endures, mathematics endures, stone endures. The pyramid speaks in a language designed to outlast memory. So what then is it saying? It may be telling us that the past is deeper than we think, that human civilization is not a straight ascent from primitive tribes, but a cycle of rise, catastrophe, and rebirth. That knowledge can be lost and rediscovered, that monuments can survive where stories cannot, that the earth undergoes changes far more dramatic and sudden than we expect. It may also be warning us. The alignment of the pyramid to celestial cycles suggests that its builders were tracking long-term patterns, patterns capable of affecting climate, sea levels, and the stability of civilizations. If they endured one of these cycles, they may have built monuments to ensure future generations recognized the signs. Standing before the pyramid, with the desert stretching endlessly into darkness, this possibility feels unnervingly plausible. Perhaps we are the generation meant to rediscover what it contains. Perhaps our rediscovery is not an accident, but part of the cycle itself. We are living in a time of rapid environmental change, shifting climates and rising seas, a time not unlike the world the builders may have faced. The pyramid's presence may not only reveal the past, but reflect the future. As the stars wheel overhead and the night grows colder, the Great Pyramid remains unmoving, eternal against the shifting sky. Its silence is not emptiness, it is expectation. It has carried a message across thousands of years, waiting for a civilization ready to interpret it. Maybe we are that civilization. Or maybe we are simply another chapter in a cycle far larger than we understand. But as the first hints of dawn return to the plateau, and the pyramid slowly emerges from the night, one truth becomes undeniable. Whatever its origins, whatever its purpose, whatever its message, the Great Pyramid is not finished speaking. The question now is whether we are ready to listen.